The Stone Cathedral by Brian E. Langston. There are things unnameable, unutterable. It's hard to describe where I've been, or to even know where too far back. Can't. It's not clear that far back. All gray and hazy. Rivers, though. The sound of rapids. Maybe that's where it all begins. Maybe it doesn't begin anywhere. I can't explain it. There are things now. It doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter, and none of you could help me now. What I have to tell you, I don't have much time. Prison, or a place akin to it, is where I've been. A place of darkness and cold, of high gray stone and shadows. A place without imagination, without color, without even the hope thereof. Not locked in a cell, behind metal bars in a cube, but there was nowhere to go, no way to leave, like an island. Do you understand? And there were guards, plenty of guards lurking in the shadows. You could feel their presence, their authority, their immense hatred of the inhabitants of this place and the job with which they'd been tasked. As if they, too, were prisoners of this vastitude of nothing. A more appropriate term? Holding pen. Because we were held there, until it was time for us not to be held there any more. But the guards, they could never leave, so I imagine, in some way, it must be worse for them, an eternity in a place despised, compelled by duty and obedience to complete your task with diligence and exactitude, if not with a compulsive, impish sadism. Do you know what they'd do when night came? No, of course you don't. How could you? At night? At night. Unnameable, unutterable things. I can't begin. You'd be happy if you could just die at night. But you couldn't die. You couldn't even sleep. There was no rest, only thirst, and gloom and darkness and mist and gray upon gray. Neither black nor white, no color, only those various mute tones. But then there was a river. A dark, slow-moving, languid, wide, and briny river, and some of us, if we threw ourselves into it, we thought perhaps we could finally end it. I wasn't convinced. I didn't, at first, but some others, they crawled in, there's no other way to describe it, and waded out into the depths until under they went, and I can only imagine they breathed in the acrid, stale waters. There was a stone cathedral in that place, a gray stone cathedral made from the same gray stones as all the other gray stone things. It rose up with twisted spires as if designed by somebody in the first stages of syphilitic delirium, at once phallic and diseased. Only a few of us ventured inside. A place full of malevolence, ambivalent in its own hatred of itself and of those who would enter it. This cathedral, inside there were rows of stones, pews, its vaulting ceilings. It contained something of an altar, a giant sacrificial slab stained a darker gray, almost brown, as if one had any imagination, which I said there was no hope of, even in this dark place. I must have imagined the color afterward. So days later, after they had gone under the river and drowned, we entered the stone cathedral, and upon this sacrificial altar were splayed out bodies, equal in number to those that had done unto themselves that darkness. A strange violence resonated, and yet also a peace, as if the violence, we knew, did not intend us harm, but lurked, waiting for something else. Cautiously, I approached that altar, each of us alone, and gazed at these bodies. Not bodies anymore, but transmogrified by the tragic waters, for the corpses seemed as if melded with underwater things, amorphous, stone-like appendages where arms or legs should have once been, water slime and kelp-like strands, caking faces and chest and abdomen and groin, eyes replaced with jagged pebbles. I was both amazed and disgusted, standing there, desirous to examine the strange artistry of the corpses, while simultaneously wanting to look away. And that's when I perceived, a whispering shadow creeping up the base of my spine, up my brain stem, into my mind, a growing, echoing babble of every language and no language at all, once there inside my head. It grew like flies buzzing, or a swarm of ants, or how water sounds when it breaks through a dam and begins to flood the surrounding land. Then these billions of voices imploded upon themselves and resolved into a single jaded thought. This is one choice, a choice, and choosing must be made. And I understood those guards. They perceived no choice, only blind loyalty. They were bound by their blindness, and this is why they could never leave. But I had a decision, perhaps many. I turned and we exited that place. I'm tired, so tired. Listen, the next day, or the next, or the next, who could tell in such a monotonous landscape, I approached that river. I stepped into its dark brine and began to wade outward, deeper into the current. I could feel it pulling me. It wanted me, to draw me down into it, under it. How simple to step forward a few more paces. I was up to my chest now. Yes, it seemed to say, almost soothingly, little feathery fingers brushing at my arms, drawing me outward, drawing me under. Come forward, come under. We will take you into our embrace. You can sleep at last. But suddenly I understood. Nothing new was this. I had done this before. There was a river, not this river, another river. Do you understand? Another river. One that I had allowed to drag me under on the sweet promises of eternal sleep. But that river had been a liar. There is no such thing as sleep. And I knew this river lied as well. I backpedaled, and it seemed as if those feathery fingers pulled at me more urgent now, and the waters began to quicken in its flow, but I kept backing up, pulling myself out of the brine that was already trying to cover me in the dark and cloying slime. I wrested myself from the river and tumbled, spent, back upon the bank, where the others stood, watching with hollow, unmerciful eyes. Listen, I haven't much time. I must sleep, soon. After that, I went back to the stone cathedral with its flying buttresses and broken gaping windows and some Boschian nightmare. You know, Hieronymus Bosch, the painter. But its doors to me were barred. I could sense the malevolence inside, swirling about, but it no longer wanted me. Unsure, I wandered that place for a time, mumbling gibberish in a language so ancient it had been forgotten when the Babylonians built their tower, or else one of my own invention. I could taste salt on my tongue. Always salt. And then it occurred to me. In a moment of sudden, beautiful clarity, it occurred to me. I began to search among the stones strewn about. I became frantic. I knew they must be there. I found one, a flat, thin thing, disc-like, and began to drag it with whatever strength I had in me toward the river. A strong breeze began to wail through the megaliths, and the others watched me with vague disgust. I could feel the guards burning me with their piercing gaze, But I continued, dragging the stone disc to the river. And into the river I went. The feather fingers began their soothing lull. Come to us, come sleep in our embrace. But I turned and pulled the disc into the river, and I know this sounds impossible, but it floated. It floated where it should have sunk. I grasped onto it with all the strength left to one possessed, and imagined all those things I held dear, for imagination had returned to me, and I clung to that stone raft, and the two of us began to float along languidly, drifting as the fingers dragged at my ankles. But the sanguine current swirled us lazily for a long, long time, drifting us against the river's bottom will, toward that other side, toward that place where light grew, and color, and hope, and freedom. And as we expansed the river, I saw her there, radiant as a wild golden mustang, wearing a wreath of hollyhocks and bluebells around her ankles, her arms outstretched as if summoning me, and finally I reached that other shore. She took my hands and lifted me from the water. After that, many other things. I'm so tired. And now, here. Hollyhocks and bluebells. Drops of water running off of dark skin. The light reflecting golden off clouds. Pale winter. I know what you're thinking. These are ravings, a man gone to some dark other side of consciousness. Maybe he dreamed it in some hazed nightmare, or perhaps they had him at an asylum with their needles and their electroshock therapies. This is all he remembers. But believe me, there is an island, and on it, a stone cathedral, and running nearby, a river of blackness and brine, and you too will walk the grounds with invisible tormentors, and you too will have a decision to make. You and every other goddamn golden boy and girl who lived and breathed and set his foot upon this blue-green world. Brian E. Langston is a poet, fiction writer, and part-time jingleer living in Seattle, Washington, USA. His fiction has appeared in the Hamilton Stone Review, JMWW, and the Catterskill Basin Literary Journal. His poetry is in Gargoyle, Poems Against War, and the Loch Raven Review, and other online and print publications. He recently received honorable mention in the Glimmer Train Short Story Award for New Writers. He is assistant editor for the literary magazine Pop Flourish from Old Growth Northwest, as well as an internet application developer during, mostly, weekday daylight hours. The music in this episode is by Sealand. You can find more of their work, including their album Dark Days, at sealand.bandcamp.com.